Greetings, programs. Welcome to episode 14. There is no soul, there is no afterlife. This week's episode, I'm hoping, will be another sensibly short episode, and is a follow-on in spirit from episode 7, Why There Is No God. In that episode, and others, we covered that atheism is nothing more than a lack of belief in theistic gods, which also includes a subset of atheists that claim there are no gods, and why this position, also known as a strong atheist position, can be justified. This episode is similar, but deals with the soul. So can there be an afterlife? Yes and no. Yes, a meaningful life after death can be a possibility. Look up Altered Carbon or My Little Pony Friendship is Optimal for details. That second one's surprisingly cool. So yes, it is possible there could be an afterlife, some way that the consciousness can survive the death of the body. But not with current technology. It is well within the bounds of possibility to scan a human brain, and to upload that data onto a computer, and then simulate that brain, a virtual world for a virtual mind. And the possibility exists that if the tech is good enough, the brain could truly die, and for the upload to take place afterwards, and the effects of death on that brain could be reversed if they were understood well enough. Because the you that thinks it's you is a pattern of thought, generated by connections within a flesh and blood brain, and that can be copied. But that's not the kind of afterlife most people mean when they talk about an afterlife. They mean a magical afterlife, where their soul leaves their body after death and floats away to heaven, they hope, and begins a new existence there. Now, there are at least 3 problems here. This assumes a lot of secondary things for which we have no evidence, like a god, and a heaven, and a hell, and so on. A second problem is that people have been looking for a soul scientifically for centuries, since science was invented, and no one's found one. That's the second problem. But the kicker is, the third and final problem, there is no room for a soul in physics. There is literally no way for one to exist or to work. And I will now go over these points in a bit more detail, step by step. So the first point. Well, first off, we have no solid evidence for any kind of afterlife. And we know this because you know for sure that if there was any concrete, solid, scientific evidence for an afterlife, the Christians, or insert religious group here, would be crowing about it day and night. Hell, they would never shut up. You would not need faith if you could see heaven in a telescope, or if the dead routinely came back to life to tell us stuff that no living person could know, or if ghosts wandered around like they do in Hogwarts or what have you. If they came back to tell us, oh yeah, the code to the safe is bloody blah and the secret treasure is buried here, we wouldn't need to speculate. We'd know for sure. No, what all we get are near-death experiences from people whose brains are starved of oxygen or drugged out of their minds. Hell, all it takes for people to start seeing stuff is a few days and no sleep. You can only imagine the stuff you'll see with a brain starved of oxygen. And this total absence of evidence has been going on for thousands of years. Hundreds of years with access to some aspect of real science. And at some point you have to be able to say, we looked hard enough, it ain't there. For even the most rigorous legal standard of evidence, an afterlife would be found not guilty of existing, and science would never advance this idea past a hypothesis at best. And not even that, really. Even if souls existed, we still have nothing to show that there is a heaven or a hell. And really, that's all we'd need rationally. But that's a very short talk, and it's not very satisfying. So what else we got? Well, point 2, the soul, has the same kind of problems. And many believers in such things will tell you, hey, you can't detect a soul by scientific instrumentation. Well, why not? And how do they know it's there? If you can't detect it, how do you know you've got one? Well, really, they don't. They just really need it to be so that they don't have to fear death. Or because they don't want to face the fact that the dead loved ones that they have lost are gone. That's kind of sad. Or mainly because someone told them that it's all real, so there. Well, if you can't see it, touch it, smell it, or even detect it with any complicated scientific instruments, how do you know it's there? Worse, if it, by its nature, it's supposedly somehow impervious to investigation, how are you ever supposed to detect that it exists? And this is where it vanishes off the radar. If it cannot be falsified, then it's not science. What's that? Imaginary interviewer? Lots of things are not science? Not true. Anything supposed to be real can be investigated by science, even if, as a topic, it is not actively investigated scientifically. For example, the claim, "Science can't prove that your mother loves you." Actually, science can do so quite easily. You simply come up with a hypothesis about your mother's love, you examine the evidence to see if it fits the hypothesis, you look for evidence that would falsify the hypothesis, and then you submit your findings to peer review. For example, evidence would be, your mother tells you that she loves you. That would be one point. She does things for you that fit within the loving theme. For example, raising you from childhood, giving birth to you, giving you hugs, making yummy food for you, patching you up when you fall off your bike, and generally being nice and motherly to you. You could also hook her up to an fMRI machine and do neurological tests. So while science does not usually investigate such things, it easily could. Which means that really the only things that science cannot investigate are things that either do not exist or are a matter of opinion. Is blue the best colour? Science probably cannot investigate that, it's just an opinion. Though it could investigate whether it's the most popular colour, that's a separate issue. And so this drops the soul into the same category as the afterlife, something that no one can show exists, and that right there should be enough to dump the whole thing. But that's still not very satisfying, is it? And it makes the title kind of clickbaity or bullshit, doesn't it? So what else have we got? Well, this is really where the hammer comes down. Part 3. Physics. Now, not everything is known about physics. Not everything is known about the brain. But here's the scary thing, and the thing that people will probably be unaware of. Enough is known about subatomic particles and their interactions with the universe to rule out a soul. And the same goes for the brain. Not everything about consciousness is known either, but we do know it comes from interactions of matter in the brain. It is not beamed into the brain from some soul stuff outside the brain. What's that, imaginary interviewer? How do we know this? Well, because we actually do know how matter works. I'm saying we as the greater scientific community that doesn't include me, but hey, it'll do. We know how matter works, we know how electrons work. We know collectively enough about the subatomic world to know for certain that there are no missing subatomic particles that would allow for a soul to exist, or to interact with the brain in any way. In the words of Sean Carroll, seriously, the laws underlying the physics of everyday life really are completely understood. Now just think about that for a second. Anybody who has ever interacted with a scientist will know how incredibly cautious they are about making blanket statements like that. Just think how solid Sean's evidence would have to be for him to make a balls-out statement like that. And this is Sean Carroll. He's a cautious guy. He's not an idiot. He's a nice guy. Think about that for a moment. And this is also footnote number 1, a link to Sean Carroll's website where he says, yes, exactly that same thing. So this discussion, but in greater detail. Yes, we really do know enough about the universe to make that claim and to make it sensibly. It's a lot like searching your pockets for a full-grown, live African elephant. At some point, you can say with certainty that there definitely is no full-grown, live African elephant in your pocket. And if you're wondering why I was so oddly specific about the African elephant, it's because in the past, when I used that example, people have been so desperate to prove me wrong that they started talking about genetically engineered micro-elephants that could fit in your pocket. I'm not kidding. So that's where we end up. There cannot be a soul because no undiscovered subatomic particles exist or could exist that a soul could be made of. We literally know enough about the universe that we can say with certainty there is no possibility of a new particle out of which a soul could be composed, and to then also interact on an atomic level with the ordinary matter of the human brain. The same goes for undiscovered forms of energy. We also know that there is no way for the ordinary matter of the brain to interact with the soul. The brain's operation may not be completely understood, but what it is made of we do understand enough to be certain that there is no way for the matter that we do know of to do anything supernatural. The standard model of physics is complete. There is no room in the equation for an interaction that a soul could use to interact with the human brain. There is no subatomic particle or energy that the soul, if it did exist, could be made of. If it were made of something that we do know about, like electrons and matter, we could detect it. The jigsaw is filled in. There is nothing else it could be made of. Worse, even if this were all wrong, the matter that the brain is made of is understood. We would be able to detect the ordinary atoms and electrons not acting right, as they were influenced by the mysterious undetectable energies of the soul. And we don't see that either. There literally is no place in physics to put either the interaction of a soul with the brain, or for it to be made out of some new energy or some new particle. If there was, the existing formulas would all be wrong, and we could detect that. And they work. If the soul were made of existing particles or energies, we could detect it. And it's not there. So, in the same way that there comes a point when you can be certain there are no live, full-grown, non-genetically modified African elephants in your pocket, there comes a point when we can be certain that there is no soul. And we are at that point now. The exact mechanisms of consciousness are still pretty mysterious, but the soul is something we can be certain about. So yeah, that's where we sit. We literally know enough about physics in the brain to be certain there is no soul, and no mechanism by which it could interact with the brain even if we somehow were wrong. And this would be all of physics. And this is in addition to the complete lack of evidence for one, and an afterlife for it to go to. Thus, we can be certain there is no afterlife. Not only is there no evidence of one, there is no soul that can possibly exist, so therefore no possible way for a soul to go anywhere. Can't go anywhere if you don't exist. So even if somehow there were a heaven or a hell, you don't have a soul, it's not going anywhere. Heaven and hell would be empty, even if we could find one somehow, which we have not. See footnote number 2, where Sean Carroll talks about the standard model of physics and explains how, yeah, we really have filled in all the gaps here. That's all for this week. Nice and short, I hope. Tune in next week when I will be talking about depression and why it is nearly impossible to understand depression if you haven't actually lived through it. Bye for now.